Hey, Baseheads. So one of the biggest questions I get about these high voltage amplifiers is how can they put out so much power? This one's rated at 200,000 watts maximum for such a small footprint. As we could see, this is a pretty small amplifier overall relative to what you would expect. So this is a photo of one of my old Sundown Audio 7500 Korean boards. This thing was definitely a surfboard and weighed a ton. Something that you'll notice that this amplifier has that the high voltage amplifiers do not is this power stage right here that takes up the majority of the space in the amplifier. The entire purpose of this stage is to take that 12 volt that you're feeding the amplifier and increasing it to the needed voltage for the operation. So that's usually, 160 plus volts that the rails are powered to feed the actual amplification stage. This means that really only 25 to 30% of the board itself is dedicated to circuitry to actually amplify the audio signal that is coming in from your RCAs. The other section is literally just providing the power for that amplification stage. So on this amplifier, we have up to 400 volts clean energy coming in ready to go. So none of that circuitry I mentioned is needed whatsoever. So we don't need an amplifier. So if you were to extrapolate the size here, I would probably need a 10, 12, 14-foot amplifier to have the power stage necessary to generate 400 volts for all of the circuitry here. If we look at the design here too, this is a Class AB push-pull amplifier. These IGBTs, the collectors here, you can see are wired to push, and the emitters here are wired to pull. So we have half of the IGBTs here working on half of the signal, and then on the other half we have these guys working. Same here. So at any time you have an entire bank essentially of IGBTs working to either push or pull voltage on the amplifier. So essentially what you have is a Class AB amplifier, which again trades off some efficiency versus a Class D for a cleaner signal. This is why folks who run these amplifiers swear that they sound better than the Class C amplifiers. There's a reason for it. The architecture is actually better for audio quality purposes. And two, we're running up to 400 volts. So that's double the voltage you see in the other amplifier. So to extrapolate, we'd have to double this entire amplifier if we wanted to run at half the voltage. So now you're talking about a 12 volt amplifier in Korean design being so big, so large, so heavy, and so inefficient, putting out all that power for the power amplification stage, where you're never going to see an amplifier that's going to put out 200,000 watts in that Korean design. Maybe you will for, museum purposes, but otherwise practical purposes, it doesn't make sense. So I truly believe that for EVs, SPL competitions where you need a shitload of power, this is really the only practical design that's going to work unless you want to carry around 10, 20, 30, 40 amplifiers to equal the power that these IGBTs can put out. Now, one thing I'm not sure in here is that there are new SiCs that can actually work at 1200 volts. So these guys are up to 600 volts. Imagine what you could do with the new EV architectures where they're running 800 volts and some of the new EVs, even 1200 volts for racing purposes. What if you could feed 1200 volts to that guy? That same 200 amps of power going in is now going to be triple what I'm running here, the total output. So I really think there's lots of room for evolution and improvement in these high voltage amplifiers, specifically for EV purposes. My thoughts.